so much for joining us tonight. A little bit about me and about Kontakt Source in general. For those of you that don't know, my name is Marian Halverson. My day job, I'm an insurance broker, so I know quite a bit about IPO and the D&O space. What I've built, Kontakt Source, is the side business that I started. In reality, it's nothing rocket science. I just have an incredible passion about connecting people to who they want to meet and people in to grow their business. So we do it here in New York. I have a loft in New York, and we do these events on a regular basis. Want to make sure that we get some in from Dan. I'm going to hand it over to him. He's one of my favorite investment banks that I know, and I've known him for now, I think, almost over 10 years. So when we come up with this, he was the first one I thought about, and I'm excited that he's going to shed some light to it. And how this is going to go, he's going to kick off with a couple of slide decks for give you some data and some information. So with that, no further ado, I would hand it over to Dan.
What happened after the Luckin Coffee? Well, Jay Clayton from the SEC decides on April 22nd that he's going to make a pronouncement, which is about the heightened risks of emerging markets. And there was no direct mention of China, but it was completely understood that that's what he was alluding to, and that's what he had in mind, and he really wanted to make a statement. Now let's flip to the next slide and see what that triggered. Well, then you have, on May 11th, President Trump, as part of his ongoing, I'll call it China-US dialogue, says to Larry Kudlow, hey, listen, write a letter to Scalia, who's the Secretary of Labor, and tell him there's no way I want them investing any public pension plan money in Chinese equities. I just want it to be verboten. It's completely wrong. Don't do it. So he sends this shell across the bow, which is a message not just to the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, but kind of to everybody that's listening here. And again, it's about $4 billion in assets. So let's go to the next slide and see what happens after that. So after that, Nasdaq decides, you know what? Let's go on record and propose not one, not two, not three, but let's propose new rules to the SEC. And again, we're not going to say it has to do with China. We're going to talk about a new definition. And it's companies that come from countries that we're going to consider restrictive markets. Restrictive markets meaning mainly there are what they call blocking statutes, which don't allow inspections of regulatory bodies. And in this case, it's firmly about the PCAOB. So Nasdaq proposes these three rules, mentions nothing of China, but they have China written all over them. We then finally have Senate Bill 945 pass, unanimously. And that bill was basically taking and codifying some of the things that have been mentioned for a long time. The main takeaway and the headline, of course, that it garnered was bill passes that will delist Chinese companies. Chinese companies who are traded on US exchanges will become delisted. And of course, that was the headline soundbite, but you really had to dig deeper to find out it's talking about auditors from the PCAOB who are not inspectable because China, of course, as a matter of sovereignty, does not allow foreign bodies to come into the country and order exams and the production of documents. Now there's a 3-year phase-in until any delisting would happen, but all that was missed, and it was the headline that everybody was going after. So let's flip to the next slide, where I'll give you a quick recap. It really is a lot of the bark being worse than the bite, as we would say, and there is a whole lot of room for maneuver here still. And I'll give you just a few pieces of feedback very quickly when I say that. Number one, the clarity that we have now from Nasdaq with these 3 new rules is refreshing. It is something that's been greatly needed. The subjective procedures that Nasdaq would apply for new listings, especially for Chinese companies, were somewhat arbitrary looking or sounding. Now they've been codified. Now we know, if you want to list, you have to jump this high. And if you jump that high, you'll pretty much be listed. And again, these are in areas like, if you don't have an inspectable PCAOB auditor, you've got to have serious talent, serious outside experience, serious people on your board that can help you navigate those waters. You need to raise at least $25 million or have a 25% public float, a real actual public float, not insiders and affiliates. And so the backdrop to these new rules being proposed was seemingly very negative. It'll be interesting to hear from the other participants here what their thoughts are. I take it as very much a positive. It's allowed deals to move forward. The other irony is that the auditors who get most frequently cited and who would actually be affected by Senate Bill 945 are those who are among the big four. So there are national, international, and even regional firms that are registered with the PCAOB that are completely inspectable, that will have no issue continuing to be auditors of Chinese companies. But that really wasn't heard, that really wasn't paid attention to as much. So I'm going to touch very briefly before I turn it over to questions and the rest of the group on three important developments in a related space. So this one you'll say, hey, I thought we were going to talk about Chinese companies listing in the US. What's this about, you know, Segway 9bot listing on the STAR market in Shanghai? Well, I bring it to your attention because it's very noteworthy. So of course the STAR, the science and technology market, is a new exchange that's been started on the mainland in China. And it's designed to be a Nasdaq rival. And they've used that illusion with other exchanges and other efforts before, but this one really seems to have some teeth. And it was great, and several companies listed, and with nice valuations, nice fundraisers. But what happened with Segway 9bot was extraordinary. So Segway 9bot, at the bottom of the capital stack, is a Chinese limited company. However, it had created an offshore international investor-friendly structure because it had contemplated either an international listing or just taking on international capital. So guess what? STAR allowed Segway 9bot to list, even though it's a Cayman Islands company, okay, very interesting, and it has a VIE, a variable interest equity method of controlling the companies underneath it. Extraordinary, highly unusual. They raised almost $300 million. So is this a sign of things to come? It's very interesting. Or was it done out of convenience because they really wanted this company and they didn't want to dismantle the offshore structure? They end up listing. I think it's super important. Let's go to the next slide. Then we get another listing in London using the London Shanghai Connect, which is set up between those two stock exchanges. And this is for a big onshore insurance company, China Pacific. They raised $1.2 billion in GDRs. Remember, the first issuance under the London Shanghai Connect was done a year prior, and that was with Huatai, where Huatai pioneered this channel, which allows capital to come out of China and invest in things that are trading elsewhere, in this case, specifically London. So a second deal gets done. Does that mean London's opening up? Does that mean it's potentially a more receptive place to list Chinese companies? Maybe the case. We happen to have an office in London. We're regulated there by the Financial Conduct Authority. We think there's going to be movement of Chinese companies to London. And then let's go to the final slide. And after that, we'll turn it over to questions. So in a nod or an acknowledgement of perhaps a softening of position, back on June 21st, Mr. Lee from the CSRC said, you know, we're really open to this closer cooperation. We just want it to be with the bodies themselves. So basically, if you come to us as a CSRC, we'll hold you by the hand, PCAOB, and we'll take you in there and do what you need to do. We just don't want you to be the lead. We don't want you to be doing it in the first person. Do it with us. Now, whether that is something tangible and something's really going to come to pass, it's anybody's guess. But I think just making that acknowledgement speaks volumes, because China has come off what was otherwise a pretty hard and a pretty serious stance. So that's the end of my slides. Those are the main points that I wanted to touch on. And many of these events you have all followed in the news. You've come to your own views and conclusions about. Happy to take questions. Happy to hear from the audience and share some more information amongst everybody.